coming up on Choppers Politics.
I've seen a lot of colleagues talk about the right to protest. If it's a right, you can't take it away. So clearly it's a freedom. The government has withdrawn from us. We still talk about the right to protest. I've got to stop myself from doing that because I thought it was a right, but I was obviously mistaken.
I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and this is Choppers Politics. On this day last year, the Daily Telegraph's front page read, "Life put on hold." And although a lot has happened since then, that is rather how it feels. At that point, the EU had just banned nearly everybody from crossing its borders, and Boris Johnson was on his second daily press conference.
A disease that is so dangerous and so infectious that without drastic measures to check its progress, it would overwhelm any health system in the world. That's why we announced the steps.
But you could still go to the pub. You could still eat at a restaurant, and you could still catch a show at a theatre. Lockdown, as we now know it, was just days away. On March 23rd, everything changed, and 1 year on, we're still dealing with the fallout from that first national lockdown. So on today's show, Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister Esther McVey will be telling us why she's hoping to channel that anniversary into something positive, and how she thinks you should be involved. But first up, MPs next week vote on whether to continue lockdown powers to as late as September. And one of the toughest lockdown critics out there has been Sir Charles Walker, the Vice Chairman of the 1922 Committee of Tory MPs. I started by reminding him of something he'd said 2 whole lockdowns ago. Charles Walker, welcome to Choppers Politics.
Well, thank you for having me on, Chris. It's great to be here.
Now, Charles, in October last year, MPs voted to pass a law by 333 to 1 to let police use reasonable force to detain and lock up people who were not self-isolating. Now, at the time, we didn't know who the one was, then we looked at Hansard, and it was you, Sir Charles Walker. And you told me that you were the one. You told me that you had been the definition of futility and also HM opposition. If it wasn't so serious, you said, and sad, it would be funny. Well, it doesn't feel very funny now, does it?
Well, you know that I've been concerned about the coronavirus laws for many months, and I remain concerned. And I hope that when the government brings them forward for renewal next week, that they will be pared back and stripped down. It's clear that the vaccines are proving successful, that case rates are dropping, and actually we now need to start opening up society again and decriminalising people for going around their business, for example, for seeing their children and grandchildren outside the prescribed rules. So I have been worried about these rules and remain worried, and I shall look very carefully at what the government brings forward next week.
What do you want to see next week? So I should explain to listeners that next week, the government must pass once again or extend the Coronavirus Act, which means that the powers stay in force for 6 months, plus other lockdown measures which run out on March 31st because MPs rise for their Easter break. So given that, what do you want to see the government to do next week?
Well, I'd prefer them to say we're not going to renew them at all. That's what I'd like the government to say. I'd prefer it to say we don't need these powers anymore. I hope that will be the case. I'm not confident that it will be, but I'm not going to change my view, and that is that I will continue to vote against these powers. I think they're excessive. Ministers say that they've asked the public to do things. They haven't asked them at all. They've coerced them. We've never been asked, and I'm afraid I just simply will not vote to criminalise parents seeing children, children seeing parents, and I will not vote and never have to criminalise lawful, peaceful protest.
Aren't those powers, though, keeping the R number down, keeping the R rate down and saving lives?
Well, I think the vaccine's keeping the R number down and saving lives. I've always argued that the first lockdown was entirely justifiable because we didn't know what we were doing. But when the data became available in early May 2020, mid-May, one could have done it differently. One could have said, right, we'll look after the elderly, we'll ask them to shelter, we'll give them a 10 or 20% uplift in their pension because we know it's a pain for them. Those with underlying health conditions who can work from home, we will support their employers in allowing them to work from home. We'll give them a 20%, 10, 20% uplift in their pay. People who work on the shop floor, who can't work from home, we will cover their wage with a 20% uplift to stay at home. And if you work in a care home, you'll do 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off with testing. And again, we'll give you a substantial increase in your pay. So there was another way of doing it, I'm afraid. It didn't have to be blanket lockdowns. I know when you suggest there was another way, you tend to get howled down. Not a COVID denier, just thinking that there is another way, was another way of doing it. Now, we haven't chosen to do it that way, but I'm not going to sign up to the current set of rules.
How many of your colleagues might vote also against or abstain next week?
I mean, I don't know. As you know, I'm not in the COVID recovery group. I'm far too unorganized to join any groups. I do it off my own bat. My concerns are well known. They've been expressed many times on the floor of the House of Commons. And I will continue to plough that furrow. Look, it might be one that doesn't meet with a great degree of popularity or makes me popular with the whips, but it's fundamentally not in my conservative DNA instinct to criminalise people for seeing their parents.
Have you had feedback from supporters or members of the public about your position?
I mean, you do. You get feedback from those who support it and those who don't. Some of it is polite, some of it is rude, but that is the way of the world, isn't it?
Yes.
You don't become a member of parliament for people to be nice to you. You roll with the punches. But look, I'm not doing it for acclaim. I'm doing it because it's what I believe in.
You once saw an old lady being bundled into a police van outside Parliament and got involved, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And I was very distressed by that. There were just a few people protesting. She'd actually split off from the rest of the protest group. And I just felt it was very un-British. We believe in freedom of protest. And I have made it clear. I made it clear in the chamber yesterday. And I've made it clear in articles I've written for newspapers. Ultimately, we are responsible as members of parliament for putting the police in this impossible position. That's not to say individual decisions, policing decisions could not have been better made. But ultimately, when I see my colleagues criticising the police on the floor of the House of Commons, it is worth reminding my colleagues that they voted for the laws that have put the police in this almost impossible position. We are responsible. We are responsible for this.
As someone who didn't vote for the laws which are enforcing this lockdown, do you obey them?
Of course I do. Absolutely.
You don't take a stand and disobey these rules and break the law?
No, because I'm a lawmaker. I obey them. Sometimes you have to remember to put a mask on when you walk into somewhere. You have to change the whole way you live. But I consciously make every effort to obey them. And you know, people make mistakes. I'm sure that somebody might have said Charles Walker's made a mistake. And I think where politicians get in trouble is when they go around lecturing everybody else and then are seen to be not following the rules themselves. I've never lectured anybody else. It's incumbent on each of us to take personal responsibility for our actions. And I hope people do take responsibility, but sometimes people make mistakes, a mask slips, I don't know what it is, but I hate this sort of finger wagging and virtue signalling.
Yeah. We're not near to being a police state yet, are we, Charles Walker?
Well, I mean, if you can't go and protest freely in the streets, I'll let your listeners answer that one. It doesn't matter how you get there. I mean, either you are or you're not. And when I see people bundled into the back of police wagons as a result of laws we've passed, and I see protests broken up by the police as a result of the laws we've passed, I'll leave others to draw that conclusion. It's not a country I recognise or feel comfortable in at the moment, to be perfectly honest. But again, it's for others.
Why is this issue mainly an issue for the Tory right, not for other parties?
But I'm not on the right of the Tory party. I mean, you can't be on the right of any political issue if you believe that the freedom to protest peacefully is sacrosanct. And what's really troubled me is I've seen a lot of colleagues talk about the right to protest. If it's a right, you can't take it away. So clearly it's a freedom. The government has withdrawn from us. We still talk about the right to protest. I've got to stop myself from doing that because I thought it was a right, but I was obviously mistaken. It's a freedom granted to us by government and withdrawn by government. It's a non-negotiable. I don't care what the crisis is, what people say. Let's be honest, there is almost no recorded transmission of coronavirus outdoors.
There was science on that. We'll let others decide on that one. Are you a protester? Have you ever protested anything at all?
I've been on the Countryside Alliance March many years ago, as you'd expect from a good Tory MP. I've led a protest march against an incinerator in my constituency, which, by the way, we won. So I've been on a few protests. I've been on a protest march about closing the urgent healthcare centre in my constituency, which money I know I've carried a few placards in my time.
Aren't you all a bit lucky that there's no actual serious politicians apart from yourself and a few others making these points out there? Because basically the body politic has signed up en masse for these restrictions in the same way it's signed up mainly to back maybe the UK supporting America's invasion of Iraq in 2003. Only the Liberal Democrats didn't, and of course they benefited, I would say, over the following years from support. And why is there no political party making the points that you're making as an individual MP?
Well, because everybody signed up to it. Political class, the establishment, dare I say, most of the media have signed up to this. Look, and I get that. There's safety in numbers. So, as I say, it's a lonely path I walk. I'm happy to walk it. I'm elected to do difficult things. If some people and many people think what I'm doing is wrong, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Have the whips given up on you? Will they be phoning you this weekend ahead of the votes next week?
Well, the whips know that I'm implacably opposed to the renewal of any coronavirus laws. I'm also never going to be made a minister. As Mike Penning, my dear friend, pointed out, when I said I don't want to be a minister, Mike Penning said, Charles, I think that decision was made by others on your behalf. So, look, I'm happy doing what I do. I love being a member of Parliament. I think it's a very noble cause.
What damage will this do, do you think, politically, maybe to the UK body politic, but also the Tory party?
I think there's going to be a long tail. I don't know. I think when we get through the pandemic, many people across the country will just forget it. They'll want to park it and move on. And I understand that. My gosh, it's been a very traumatic time for many. I've said in the chamber there will be a long tail of mental health problems. There will be a significant level of anxiety within society that will manifest itself over the coming months and years. Some of that will end up as severe mental health issues and present in the NHS. So I think there's going to be a long tail. But personally, my relationship with government as a citizen will never feel the same again. I will never look at government with the same easy eye.
A line has been crossed then, Sir Charles Walker?
In my view. And I know the government had to make difficult decisions. The opposition joined them in making those difficult decisions, but it's something that I'll carry with me. It's changed my relationship with the state and will forevermore. It's not a relationship that will ever be repaired. I will always be much more wary of the state now.
And on that sobering note, Charles Walker, the Vice Chairman of the 1922 Committee of Tory MPs, thank you for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. Thank you.
Well, Chris, as ever, you're a great interrogator. You ask the questions that need to be asked, and thank you for having me on. You've opened me up like a tin of sardines.
Thank you, Charles. OK, now don't go anywhere. In just 30 short seconds, Cabinet Minister Esther McVey will be telling us why next Tuesday is a day to reflect. Right after this.
Hello, former England hooker Brian Moore here. Well, the Six Nations is back, and so is my podcast, Brian Moore's Full Contact. Each week we will get the biggest and best names from the world of rugby to dive into every ruck, maul and TMO decision. You can't nab a front row seat this year, but with our podcast you don't need to. So just search for Brian Moore's Full Contact on your podcast app, hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss it.
Now, March 23rd, 2020 is a day most of us would probably rather forget. It was a day that many of us learned for the first time what a lockdown felt like. The confusion about what it might mean for you, your family and your work, and the hundreds of unknowns about the new virus. But Tory MP Esther McVey is hoping to turn that day into something positive. And we sat down earlier and she started by explaining how she's hoping to unite the nation on lockdown's first birthday. Esther McVey, welcome to Choppers Politics. Now, you're busy, aren't you, organising something for next week?
Yeah, next Tuesday, as it's the anniversary of the very first COVID lockdown, the 23rd of March, basically the day everything changed. And this is a grassroots movement to mark that event, a national day of community kindness, and to acknowledge the heroes and the victims of COVID, those who've died, those who've lost so much, to thank those who've done so much, and also to look forward as lockdown lifts to a brighter future.
What do you want people to do?
Well, we've joined forces with the Variety, the children's charity, because obviously children really have suffered in this pandemic, and particularly vulnerable children, and charities have too. So what I've done now, I've got cross-party support. So it is acknowledged now as a national commemoration. There will be a minute's silence in the House of Commons. So I'd like everybody, if they could, to do this minute's silence and to just reflect what the whole country has gone through. I'd also like people to just make a shape of a heart with their hands and then post that picture up on social media, because lots of us can't go out. We've still got to be COVID compliant. And that is about sort of in the memory of people who've gone, but also the kindness that's come out of COVID. So take a picture of you with a heart, put it on social media, hashtag 23rd of March. And so many people have done it. We've got over 20 celebs on board, from Keith Lemon to Nick Knowles, Eamon Holmes, Torvill and Dean, to the English rugby team, and thousands of members of the public who've already done it on the website 23rdofmarch.co.uk. And people are also making videos of lockdown memories, what they're doing, what it was about, how it happened, and what they have missed over lockdown and what they'd like to see going forward. So we're taking videos of acts of kindness that people are going to do on that day. Maybe get a prescription for your next door neighbour, maybe go and get the shopping for them, maybe bake a cake, whatever it is, it's acts of kindness. And then we're going to take this through as a national commemoration date every year.
And there's a nationwide beacon of remembrance also, isn't it, by beaming phones, candles, torches into the night sky at 8 p.m.
And you're quite right. There's other charities, other people wanting to get involved in this in different ways. And again, another way at 8 p.m. on the night of the 23rd, people will either have torches, the mobile phones, whatever it is, again, on the front step. 8 p.m, again, that moment of reflection. But in the House of Commons, it will be at midday.
This is your idea?
If I'm being honest, it came out of a conversation with a group of friends. Many wanted to remember people who'd passed, over 120,000 people in the UK, people who'd been deeply affected by it, friends of mine who'd worked in the NHS and worked so hard, and other people who were shop workers, all the frontline workers, police, you name it, just to think about those. That's why I say be thankful for those who've done so much, who've worked so hard, remember those who've passed, but also how do we remember that COVID kindness, that community, that sense of community that was born out of COVID, and take that forward. And we can't forget that kindness we must remember and take forward out of such a dark period of time. So it's like lifting out of lockdown, getting our freedoms back and moving forward.
Have you lost someone to COVID, can I ask, Esther McVey?
I haven't. But that does not mean that, we've watched it and we've shared in other people's sorrow. And then, look at the great resilience of the country too. The vaccine success, our great scientists. So I think there are things that we can look forward to with positivity out of something that was such a dark period of time for this country.
Is the mood turning at all, do you think, against the government? There's been lots of fury about the 1% pay rise for nurses, and this is akin to being on the doorstep clapping our emergency workers. But equally, do you think the blame game could be starting shortly?
Well, I think there will be, and the government have said this, haven't they? They're going to have a reflection over everything that had happened. But when a pandemic strikes that nobody knew how to deal with it across the world, there are lots of things that have gone wrong, and there will be things that have gone right. So the vaccine has gone right, and there will be other things, track and trace, that people will be looking into and say, could we have locked down earlier? Could we have done it differently? But, hindsight is a wonderful thing. So yes, I think it is absolutely right, because inevitably, I'm quite sure there'll be another pandemic. So what do we do and remember what we got right, and also the failings, and how do we speed that process up?
One of the big issues and the big successes of recent months has been the vaccine rollout. Have you, as a Brexiteer, someone who fought for this Brexit deal from the very beginning, do you think in any sense that Brexit could have led to thousands of lives being saved. I say that because by being out of the European Union, we have pursued our own vaccine agenda, which means that more of us can be vaccinated before people in the EU.
Well, I think this is a very interesting subject, because part of Brexit was sovereignty, being in control of your own laws and your destiny and where you're going. And, the Brexit was looming. So that was the backdrop. Brexit was looming as the negotiations were starting for the vaccine, as people were understanding it, what was happening, as scientists were coming together to say, what are we going to do as negotiations were going forward? And interestingly, sort of the EU demands on the UK were huge. So were we going to be a part of what the EU was doing? And they excluded us from governance, negotiations, price and quantity. So we went on our own journey. And that's when we brought in that really no-nonsense operator, Kate Bingham, the venture capitalist there, to look at how we negotiate the future. And then very much she put together a portfolio of vaccines. She also looked at investing in manufacturing in the UK so we could also adapt. And she went across, several vaccines, the Moderna one, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Novavax, Sanofi, Valneverne, and the AstraZeneca, hedged 400, bets against all of them, and got 400 million vaccines. And off we went. And it was the speed with which we did this, got going, joined up our excellent scientists at Oxford, Professor Sarah Gilbert there, who had looked into sort of the research, was doing this. This was her career. And we brought together the research, the medicines, and the commercial know-how. And so, yes, there was a strength in us there being a sovereign state going forward. And what you saw in the EU was a bit of uncertainty, maybe people breaking ranks as well. You saw sort of Germany, Italy, France, the Netherlands thinking, should we go separately? What should we do? The rest of the EU coming on board, which opened the door for the Commission to do the negotiation. And then you also saw a slower process as the authorization went through the European Medicines Agency, whereas we had a fast-track mechanism in a national regulator and we could go quicker. So you're quite right. You can see the very difference between a nimble, smaller country going through the process and a sort of a giant organization, which is the EU.
And we're a speedboat against their tanker, I think, as the European Union have expressed it that way.
And the world will only get quicker. I mean, that's what we're seeing at the moment, isn't it? As we live in a global world, as communications get quicker, as technology increases, things are only going to get faster. And those of us who were Brexiteers could see this, and we thought a smaller, nimble, sovereign state that could be in charge of its own rules, but then join up with other groupings and other countries when we needed to be, was the way forward to adapt to this modern world. And that's what we believed in. And that's why we always said it was outward looking, joining together when you can, but also reflecting the needs of your citizens and your country.
But no one knew, of course, that when we left the European Union, that one of the massive dividends of that would be going it alone and protecting this country maybe as much as a year before our friends and neighbours on the continent.
No, nobody saw that. You're quite right. But what we did see was, free trade agreements. What we did see was partnerships with emerging nations and countries. What we did see was friendships back with the Commonwealth. So you're right. You'd be wrong to say that we foresaw a pandemic and how we'd go about getting the vaccine. But we did see a more nimble country working globally.
But may I ask you, what was your response to the murder of Sarah Everard?
Gosh, like anybody else, huge grief, really. We talk about safety on the streets, we talk about safety of women. And I have to say, as an only daughter, I was always brought up to be hyper vigilant. Before I ever went out, my dad would always say, walk in groups, keep a fiver tucked in your shoe for a taxi, don't walk down dark roads, don't cut across parks, don't get into cars with people you don't know. So I've always been super vigilant.
If I may, that was several years ago when that warning was given to you by
yes, my dad was telling me that many decades ago, so I apologise for that. But no, I just mean as a single daughter, I was always vigilant and aware of what could go wrong. So if we can make the streets safer then that is absolutely the right thing to do. So I welcome that we're saying now we're going to have more CCTV. Some of us have been calling for that for a while. Lighter streets, of course we should do that. I would go further and say, let's use our DNA databases more, which we're not doing. I mean, up until 31st of March last year, which is the latest for the information, 213,000 crime scenes had DNA left there. But none of them could be matched up because we didn't have the match on the DNA database. What I'm saying is we should now use all things at our disposal, technology in that database to increase sentences for rape and sexual offence. And of course, stop this ridiculous releasing of people halfway through their sentence for crimes like rape and violent crime.
Is that how then we shift the focus from women looking out for their own safety to men checking their behaviour?
It's a societal issue. So yes, there will always be, I was brought up to be super vigilant, but of course you want the streets safer because everybody gets the benefit of those streets being safer, particularly women. And of course, everybody's got to look at what they're doing, what are their actions, why they were doing that. Of course, there's huge things to learn from this. And it is time for us all to take a step back and look at what is going on, the rise in violence, the rise in sexual violence, and stop it by whichever means we can.
Do you think men are the problem? Do you want to see a curfew for men as has been mooted?
Look, I have never labelled anyone or pointed the finger specifically at anyone, and I think that would be the wrong thing to do. What we have to do is make society safer across the board.
Do you think in any sense that the fact that women feel unsafe is the fault of the Tory government? Because you're describing there how you've taken measures throughout your life to be safe on the streets, and that, of course, has covered all sorts of governments.
This new police crime and sentencing and courts bill coming through at the second reading now, within that, is to stop the perpetrators of serious violence and sexual offences being automatically released halfway through the sentence. Now, that was something that Labour brought in. And for me, who is always wanted honest sentencing, I was appalled at that. I mean, I'm sad in a way that as a Conservative, it's taken us so long to bring this through, but I'm pleased we are now doing it. There has to be an honesty in sentencing. And people are sentenced because that was the sentence that fit the crime. So, these are the sort of measures that we should be taking. I would increase sentences for those rape, sexual offences and the most violent of crimes.
Just on that then, on the policing and sentencing bill, is the balance right? The maximum for punching a statue or attacking a statue is gone to 10 years, whereas just 2 years of hitting a policeman.
Well, I think you've got to be careful how you equate the different sentencing there. One is a maximum, which is, a maximum for 10 years. I don't know necessarily what somebody would get for that. And you're quite right.
Well, sorry, if I may ask, they are both for maximums. They're doubling the assault on emergency workers to 2 years.
And I will come to that. I personally have campaigned for a long while to increase the sentencing for attacks against our emergency workers, and I would increase that too. So I'm not afraid at all. I'm proud that I am somebody who would go for stricter sentencing, but I would absolutely protect our emergency services. As you know, I campaigned for the police covenant to protect our officers when they have to go about their sort of duty. So yes, I would increase the sentences for attacks against our emergency workers.
Yes, to be clear, that's going up from 12 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
But for attacking a statue, it goes up from 3 months to as much as 10 years. So these are both maximum figures we are comparing.
Yeah, what I would like to see, because, as I said, whilst that was a maximum, and I'd be interested to see what people are sentenced for, what I'd like to see is a consistency in sentencing and commensurate measures in sentencing. And I really do think that is a piece of work that needs to be done in the Ministry of Justice, so you don't have debates on shows like this, which you rightly are pointing out, why this sentence for this and not for that. I mean, they do have to have an overhaul in what they are doing and realistically seeing what people are being sentenced. Otherwise, you can have debates and not really have what people are being sentenced to.
Well, Esther McVey, listen, back to where we started now. I mean, the 23rd of March is a day of reflection. Thank you so much for joining us on Choppers Politics, and we'll put a link to this excellent day, this 23rd of March day of reflection, so others can take part. But thank you.
Oh, best wishes. Thank you, Chris.
That's all for today, and I know you hear me say it week in and week out, but we really can't make these podcasts without our listeners. That's you. And a great way to help us find new ears is to leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And do subscribe to this feed to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. And that includes this weekend with a corker of a show with our associate editor Gordon Rayner, who's taken a forensic look at the events of 1 year ago with a series of great articles in this week's Daily Telegraph. So why not join in the conversation about what Sir Charles Walker had to say about lockdown, or Esther McVey's views on law and order? Email us, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk, and you can find us on Twitter. We're at Choppers Podcast. Thank you to my guests this week, Sir Charles Walker and Esther McVey. Thanks to my producers, Theo Luludis, Louisa Wells and Elliot Lampitt. And most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. We really appreciate it. And if you can, please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph. Until next time though, cheerio!